Bien, muy buenos días. Sean todos ustedes bienvenidas, bienvenidos a esta presentación del libro que fue editado por el Woodrow Wilson y la Universidad de Harvard, que tiene como título North America 2.0, Forging a Continental Future. Soy Sergio Alcocer, presidente del Consejo Mexicano de Asuntos Internacionales. Me disculpo por no poder asistir personalmente el día de hoy, no obstante que así lo había acordado con Alan Bersin, con Tom Long, por una reunión que no tenía yo previsto, a la cual tengo que asistir en unos minutos. Y agradezco muy cumplidamente a Damián Martínez, quien ha aceptado pues, cumplir el rol que me correspondía como moderador de esta reunión. Muchas gracias, Damián. Bien, me gustaría en estos cuantos minutos que tengo asignados, primero que nada reconocer el esfuerzo de los editores del libro, Tom Long y Alan Bersin, quienes trabajaron durante 3 años en persiguiendo a los distintos autores de los capítulos para que se terminaran estos documentos a tiempo y con la calidad que ellos querían. Algunos de los autores lo lograron, otros donde me correspondió a mí, no sé, pero ya juzgarán ustedes si efectivamente y si se logró fue por los coautores del libro, de los 2 capítulos en los cuales tuve el privilegio de participar. Pero en todo momento quisiera yo señalar que lo que se buscaba en este libro era plantear con esta visión de futuro, esta Continental Future, una visión de futuro, cuáles son las oportunidades que tienen los 3 países de América del Norte frente a los retos de la globalización, frente a los retos de ahora, la multipolaridad, particularmente con una visión fresca de los diferentes temas. Como verán ustedes, y si lo escucharán en la presentación del libro, se han retomado algunos temas de una versión anterior de este documento y algunos otros temas que son nuevos o con una visión distinta de estos temas, y seguramente será este libro a lo largo de los próximos años un referente tanto en materia de política pública como en materia de política empresarial, acerca de poder lograr que estas oportunidades se conviertan en motores del desarrollo para nuestra región. Quisiera yo presentar a quienes nos acompañan el día de hoy. Inicio con la señora Shauna Hemingway. Ella es graduada en Economía e Historia por la Universidad de Toronto. Desde el 2002 es miembro del Departamento de la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores y Comercio Internacional del Gobierno de Canadá. Actualmente ocupa la posición número 2 dentro de la Embajada de Canadá en México. Ella habla perfectamente inglés, francés y español. Le damos la bienvenida. Muchísimas gracias. Ha tenido diversas posiciones en el ministerio, tanto en Corea del Norte, Corea del Sur, como en nuestro país en años previos, en el año 2010 a 2014. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Igualmente le doy la bienvenida a Alan Bersin, muy querido amigo con quien tuve el privilegio de trabajar durante varios años en nuestras capacidades en el gobierno estadounidense y en el caso en el gobierno mexicano. Actualmente él es Global Fellow y es el Fellow sobre América del Norte en el Wilson Center, así como también es Senior Fellow en el proyecto de Homeland Security en la Universidad de Harvard, en la Escuela de Gobierno de la Universidad de Harvard. Ha tenido diversas posiciones en el sector público de los Estados Unidos. Quisiera destacar 2 de ellas. La primera de ellas como comisionado del US Customs and Border Protection en el año 2010 y 2011, así como secretario de Educación del Gobierno de California en el 2005-2006. Igualmente también le damos la bienvenida a la distancia a Tom Long, quien es profesor en la Universidad de Warwick en materia de relaciones internacionales y también es profesor afiliado en el Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas en nuestro país. Desde el año 2016, él ha encabezado la iniciativa que heredó Robert Pastor sobre investigación en América del Norte. Ha escrito muy ampliamente sobre este tema, tanto en revistas arbitradas, así como libros. Quisiera yo destacar el más reciente de él, en donde se habla de una guía sobre la política internacional publicada por la Universidad de Oxford en el año de 2022. Muy bienvenido, Tom. Y no menos, por supuesto, pero presentarles a Damián Martínez Tagüeña, quien es miembro del Servicio Exterior mexicano, actualmente en licencia, ha tenido diversas posiciones dentro de la Cancillería, ha sido en 2 ocasiones jefe de la oficina de subsecretarios de Relaciones Exteriores de América del Norte, igualmente fue nuestro cónsul general en Hong Kong y que en diversas capacidades ha servido dentro de la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores y actualmente es director senior en FTI Consulting Strategic Communication. Entonces, le agradezco una vez más a Damián que haya aceptado la moderación de este evento y pues una vez más en nombre del COMEXI, muchas gracias por la posibilidad de tener esta presentación de este documento tan importante para América del Norte, muy especialmente para nuestro país. Le doy la palabra entonces a a la señora Shauna Hemingway, quien nos hará su intervención inicial para posteriormente pasarle el micrófono a Damián para que él haga favor de moderar las intervenciones. Adelante, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. Solo para checar si está funcionando el micrófono. Muchas gracias. Sí, agradezco la invitación de estar aquí. Qué gusto estar con Alan y Damián aquí. Ustedes también que están aquí en Club de Industriales. Y gracias, Sergio. Gracias, Tom, también por estar con nosotros. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Creo que vamos a hablar en español porque el libro está escrito en español, en inglés. Pero después podemos atender cualquier pregunta en inglés o español. I think we're in a very special moment in the relationship. My time working on Mexico goes back to when I joined in 2002. And it's been a real pleasure. It's such a dynamic region. It's such a dynamic relationship. I always say it's a very complete relationship between Mexico and Canada in particular. And I think what we saw in January was a turning point in our discussions as a regional grouping, but also in the 3 bilateral, or I suppose perhaps more, the bilateral relationships that exist within North America. I've seen a lot of summits, having worked on G7, G20 summits for a long time, and I don't think I've seen such a successful one as what we saw in January, where there's a real depth to the engagement between leaders. It's special to have 3 important leaders around the table in comparison with some of our other G20 meetings where it's difficult to get as much face time. We had, of course, the spouses joined as well, which I think really strengthened the discussions in a more informal basis and helped our leaders to get to know each other, which is important in our relationship with our neighbors. I'm really pleased to see that we are using more and more the term, North America Leaders Summit, which is the official term, because I think it's really important that we hear the words North America. Not often enough do we identify ourselves as North American in this region, and I think the terms matter. So for that as well, it sort of turned a page in terms of our discussions. And I think I'd like to see us talking more and more as we engage in the world, as we engage in the Americas, as North America. So the North American interest in engaging with the Americas, the North American interest in engaging with the Caribbean, where I was posted previously. Clearly, as the Prime Minister said when he was here, if not the most dynamic region in the world, it certainly could be. We have all the natural resources and all the human resources to achieve everything that our people want us to achieve together. We have the capital available to us to drive growth. And I think this helps ensure that we have opportunities and benefits. And what we need to do is ensure that those reach all segments of our society so that everyone is seeing the benefits of North American integration and collaboration. Clearly, speaking about people, we have the diverse skills and the talents to innovate. And I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is how we help people in all 3 countries across North America achieve their full potential. We're certainly talking a lot about that in our individual countries, but we should be looking at how every North American member can reach their full potential. And I think given the geopolitical situation that we're facing today, certainly having a strong North America isn't a nice to have. This is something that is essential for our future. We're hearing more and more moving away from the just-in-time model to a focus on resilience of our supply chains and proximity to markets. And I think North America has some important work to do there. Interconnectivity, which is related, will be key to our future. We're seeing the rail connections with the Kansas City initiative and the gas connections that TC Energy is bringing. And adding to that, predictability will be key. We need to give that not just to companies, but to citizens. They need to have predictability in their movements across borders and in their collaboration with people from all parts of the region. So as we turn, Canada has the privilege, and focus on this to finish, but we have the privilege of hosting the next North American Leaders Summit before the end of this calendar year, we hope. And this is truly what we want to focus on, is about people and opportunities. We'll be following the same 6 pillars that everyone is quite familiar with in the Leader Summit process. But I think we need to really bring out or focus our energy on recognizing that at the end of the day, this is about people and opportunities. If I group some of the initial pillars together, we have equality, diversity, and inclusion. We have migration and development and health. And at the end of the day, this is the reality in which people live that we're talking about. And if we look at it with that kind of more tangible perspective, I think we can achieve great things. Then we have the environment in which our people are operating, in which they're living, in which they're raising family, in which they're building prosperity for the benefit of everyone in their communities. Then competitiveness, and that's all about seizing these opportunities together. We know that interregional trade, and I saw it in the introduction to the book, is about $1.2 trillion every year, but that doesn't take into account all the boost that we all get from working together when we then sell our products internationally. So if we look at the benefits of trade of North America, it goes far beyond just our trade with each other, but it's a key factor in our success outside of our region. And finally, security, we need to work together, because at the end of the day, this is our top commitment to our people, and it's essential so that they can seize the opportunities before them. So I know we'll have a chance to listen to far more expert views from both Alan and Tom. But some of the thoughts that I'm thinking about as we move forward is, how do we build greater understanding between our countries and increase our cross-system operability? And in that, I'm thinking of immigration, I'm thinking of mobility of people, mobility of products, which Alan and I were just talking about earlier. And then, who are the partners we need to engage? Who are the stakeholders and the civil society players that are going to be absolutely essential to our inclusive agenda as a region? And here we're looking ahead to 2026 when we have the World Cup and human rights. And again, getting back to ensuring that everyone can reach their full potential. What would it take to start building a North American identity? And how can, institutionalizing our agenda, how can that help strengthen our framework? And how do we do that? Where do we start in terms of making our institutions strong across the free country? So I'll stop there, Damián, and pass it back to you.
Thanks. So,
un segundo antes de despedirme, simplemente señalar a Damián, que es nuestro coordinador en la unidad de estudio y reflexión sobre América del Norte en el COMEXI. Y bueno, ¿quién mejor que él para que conduzca? Y muchas gracias, y perdón que me tenga que despedir. Muchas gracias, Shauna.
Gracias.
okay, so I think maybe we can continue to the question. So I'm happy to be able to pinch it for Sergio, just to have the opportunity to thank both Tom and Alan for this. There's a lot of effort behind it, and also to thank all of the authors of the chapters and everyone whose ideas are in the book. I think a point you make in the book is that this is that America is built from the bottom up, and that's a collective effort, sometimes without a clear push from the government, even pushed by social and economic forces. And I think the book itself is an example of just how it is that North America is built and developed. Great depth of expertise in the book, and a lot of small steps taken to walk a long distance. So a lot of people in the room have been part of that story. I'm sure a lot of friends that are online have been as well. So thanks again for the book and for sharing this with everybody. So following the schedule that was given to me, I have to, I'll ask Tom for some introductory words, then Alan, and then we can go to a Q&A. That's good? All right, so Tom, thanks. Please.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Quería decir algo en español antes de cambiar al inglés, y también es un gusto escuchar que voy a estar cantando más o menos la misma canción que Shauna, así que eso creo que es una muy buena señal del momento en el que nos encontramos aquí. Quiero dar las gracias a Sergio Alcocer, a Celio Toro también, que ayudó a coordinar ese evento, y a Damián y todo el equipo de COMEXI por la oportunidad de hablar de este libro y la agenda norteamericana en este prestigioso foro. También debo de destacar la labor de Alejandra López de Alba, quien preparó este evento en un tiempo récord a pesar de varios cambios, así que muchas gracias. Gracias también a la Embajada de Canadá y a Shauna por su presencia y sus palabras, y esperamos grandes cosas de la próxima cumbre de líderes de Norteamérica, y sé que el equipo de Global Affairs Canada ya está trabajando a tope con sus pares en México y los Estados Unidos para adelantar la cooperación regional. Quiero empezar esta conversación subrayando lo que creo que en este libro, lo que creo que este libro puede enseñar acerca del papel de América del Norte en el mundo, antes de pasar la palabra a Alan. También sé que tenemos un público multilingüe, así que voy a cambiar ahora al inglés, el idioma del libro, pero también con gusto podemos continuar la conversación en inglés o español, o con nuestros colegas canadienses, por lo menos en francés. So, where in the world is North America? So when we look at the globe, of course, it's easy enough to find, but when we look at global politics, North America is often overlooked. That might be much less the case there at COMEXI than it is here in the United Kingdom, where I'm sitting at the moment. But elsewhere, summits of world leaders often draw headlines and bright lights. Last year's return to higher profile NALs was very welcome. But at other times, North American summits have sometimes been last-minute additions or fallen off the calendar altogether. In Canada, Mexico, and the United States, too often, political leaders have rarely talked about North America, at least explicitly, and when they do, it's not always pretty. So in this sense, last year's NALS, as Shauna signaled, was a huge step forward. But with looming challenges and looming elections, those of us who aspire to what my mentor Robert Pastor called the North American idea need to make sure that we don't fall back into the rhythm of the North American three-step, that is, one step forward and two steps back. Even when we get together in forums like this one or convene important meetings like the NALS, I would suggest that we rarely think of or analyze North America as a global region. But broader global dynamics have shaped and continue to shape the region's trajectory. North America, as we know it today, emerged from a specific global context, intimately connected to the fall of the Berlin Wall and integration in Europe. At that moment, the North American idea was a transformative move to embed openness and institutionalize cooperation among disparate economies. The region's relative stagnation after its first decade also owed to shifts in international politics, namely the tremendous growth of Chinese and Asian production and the far-flung US response to the September 11th attacks. The regional project then lost momentum, drifting as the world around it changed. But today, the global deck is being reshuffled. A combination of factors, the uneven recovery from the pandemic, heightened competition with Russia and China, volatile energy prices, and the urgent need for climate action create opportunities for North American cooperation. These dynamics, as well as the region's near-death experience during the Trump administration, also point to the need to rethink the importance of building a more inclusive and perhaps more expansive North American region. Across this book, across several chapters, A clear message comes out that other parts of the world do not see North America as a coherent region, nor do they seek to engage with us as a region. And why should they, when our governments have so rarely made the case in the past for North America on the global stage? After 30 years, we still struggle to enunciate our shared interest internationally and to act on them at the global level or when dealing with other regions. And there have been real consequences to this. For example, in the book, Jorge Guajardo and Natalia Munoz write that, quote, as China grew more economically and politically powerful, North America became less relevant as a region. China does not see North America as a region and indeed has benefited from the lack of a coordinated approach over 2 decades. In the words of Enrique Dessel-Peters, a scholar at UNAM, China was, quote, NAFTA's uninvited guest, interrupting the consolidation of North America's manufacturing sector. The disruptions and tensions of the last few years suggest that there may have been a lot of wisdom in the North American road that was not taken. But today, it seems that North American interests regarding China are converging, but a joint approach is often still lacking, even as discussions of nearshoring take center stage. North America's fragmented approach has also produced and embedded disadvantages in terms of our region's relations with the European Union. In her chapter in the book, Michelle Egan notes that there has been, quote, little thinking about how to leverage North America's negotiating power with third markets, such as the EU. Instead, Canada, Mexico, and the United States have engaged individually in competitive liberalization with a variety of other trade partners, she writes. As a consequence, Canada and Mexico risk being caught in a muddle of regulatory frameworks. Turning north, Jack Durkee highlights the growing importance of the North American Arctic. U.S. and Canadian bilateral cooperation is key here, but perhaps not enough. The Arctic demands a more engaged approach to empowering local indigenous communities, converging with an issue that received attention in the USMCA and that is a high priority for our Canadian and Mexican friends. Major changes in shipping routes through the Arctic have the potential to reshape trade patterns that affect the whole region. Dealing with climate change, connectivity, and growing competition will require shared regional approaches. North America's strengths, North America's strengths are rooted in our shared production platform and our robust social and economic ties. We've often counted on these economic links, driven mostly by the private sector, to do the heavy lifting of building North America or to mobilize in its defense. But if the North American project is to generate more inclusive growth, if it is to lead on an energy transition, and perhaps if it's just to survive changing political circumstances, it needs greater leadership. For example, North America is a demographically dynamic region, a chapter in this book highlights, and it creates a window for sustained economic growth. However, without political action on migration, especially from the United States, we will surrender our demographic window. As the picture of migration today shows, a trilateral North America does not sit in isolation from the rest of the hemisphere. On this issue and on others, we should widen our aperture to fit the challenge or the opportunity at hand, as Richard Feinberg recently wrote, at times stretching into Central America and the Caribbean. North America then needs policies that enhance our labor mobility, as Andrew Seeley and Carlos Heredia argue in this book. And those individuals will need skills to adapt to changing technologies and jobs. If we're going to maintain North American leadership in global value chains, then we must build on our favorable demographics with regional investments in workforce development and, in my sphere, collaboration in higher education. This is something Sergio Alcocer, Earl Anthony Wayne, and others in the book argue. At an international level, we have peace among North American countries. But for many people in North America, this geostrategic reserve is marred by profound social violence and dislocation. And this is not an issue that is limited to Mexico, I hasten to add. When we respond to illicit markets primarily by militarizing our borders and securitizing our relationships, then we cede the advantages that we've gained through our Pacific international relations. Instead, cooperation with our North American neighbors may be our best bet to anchor global institutions in the coming decades of rapid change. But that requires a vision of how our region relates to the world. North America's relative absence from the global stage, I think, is something of a paradox. As has been pointed out already, seen by our levels of trade, investment, and social integration, North America is as dynamic as any region in the world. But if you've followed the words and actions of the region's leaders over the last few decades, one might think that it barely exists. As Oxford's Andrew Hurrell wrote some 15 years ago, North America is, quote, a region that dares not speak its name. Hurrell's observation in some ways has seemed even more prescient as the region's central pact no longer includes the words North America. Perhaps for some, this absence of attention, the absence of speaking North America does not matter. Something that I think I certainly agree with Shauna in saying that the emphasis on North America and in the Leaders Summit is a good step in changing. But advocates of North America who have often trumpeted the region's successful growth of trade and investment since NAFTA need to recognize as well that those macroeconomic achievements were not always enough. Unless the region generates more inclusive and shared growth, and we figure out how to communicate it, North America is destined to face new waves of backlash. Calls for greater North American cooperation in the past have often been dismissed by those who say, North America is not Europe, a European approach won't work here. And I agree, no one in this volume is proposing something like a North American Union. Instead, if there's something that scholars of regionalism around the world have learned, it's that EU-style institutions are not one-size-fits-all. Instead, I'd argue that we need to start by highlighting and building upon the ties that we have. We need to make the North American Leaders Summit a consistent priority, backed by a sustained and increasingly institutionalized intergovernmental implementation and review effort. Even without supranational institutions, we need to figure out ways to address our region's cooperation conundrum. Because North American issues cut across borders and bureaucracies, we need to strengthen the already existing links between our three governments, building on things like the Free Trade Commission and the Competitiveness Committee. We also need to refocus on linking the NOLs with parallel civil society, academic research, and private sector networks. Of course, a lot of these connections exist, but I'd argue they need a vision, an orientation, priorities, and salience if North America is to thrive. We tend to start with a policy model where we focus on particular interests and difficult national decisions before identifying disputes and, if we're lucky, possibilities of cooperation. But I think there's a risk that without a bigger vision, why are we doing this? What is North America's role in the world? That we will get stuck in a tyranny of small differences. So for a moment, I'd suggest that we shift our optic, that we think about how North America matters for our place in the world. Doing so, I think, may help convince others of what this book proposes, that North Americans have greater commonality than difference, and that we have much to gain from working together. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to discuss this book.
Thanks so much, Tom, for the great review of the many issues that are covered. So I'm sure that a lot will come up in the questions that we can go deeper into the issues. Alan, please.
Thank you, Tom. Gracias por este giro elegante por el libro y los asuntos que tiene que ver con el próximo paso de nuestra región en América del Norte. Todos somos norteamericanos. Como nos ha dicho Shauna, es un momento especial. It seems to me that we are in an era que se siente un poquito como los años 30, donde hay una guerra agresiva dentro de Europa, con revanchist tendencies, que tenemos una parada en la manera de conducir el comercio entre las naciones, y también tenemos un sentido que con los cambios tecnológicos que han pasado, que no tenemos ningún control sobre la vida oficial o en muchos casos personal. What I'd like to talk about this morning is picking up on both where Shauna was and Tom, is with regard to why regionalism is so critical to us, how strategy that might suggest itself for taking this next step in this period where we see a real intersection between the end of globalization 1.0 that dominated the world since 1990 and the entry of China into the World Trade Organization, the passage of NAFTA, of TLC in 1993-94, again, a generation old, and the changes that we see in the geopolitical situation. All of these present this, I think, este momento especial que ha identificado Shauna. Why do we have, if we recognize that economics has been the calling card of North America, we have to understand why this massive increase in trade, now almost $3 trillion among the three nations, $3 trillion of trade that has grown since NAFTA was first put in place in the 1990s. How come with that great achievement, this creation of a shared production platform, particularly involving automobiles and aircraft and medical devices, advanced medical devices, how is it possible that during this period we have not developed a political capacity to actually do it? I think Tom indicated in his talk the reasons that suggest that governments have stayed away from this. We are three proud nations with three currencies, three languages, and we intend to stay that way. And we should not see ourselves as moving toward an evolution toward a European Union. That's not the way North America has been built, as Damián said, from the bottom up, where it needs to be done. Now, I'll come to where I think governments need to be more involved, at least in getting out of the way. But in fact, this has been an extraordinary project that the business community and the NGO communities have primarily built. But think about it. Think about what the achievement is. We have Donald Trump and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, each in their own way a quasi-populist, and certainly each in their own way a nationalist. Trump came to power trashing Mexico and NAFTA, the worst trade deal ever. AMLO, with the transformation that he seeks, is not interested in the international scene in the way that his recent predecessors have been. And yet look at the way in which these two leaders have both embraced the economics of North America, both of them. Donald Trump calling and causing the renegotiation of U.S. MCA or TEMEC or CUSMA. As Tom pointed out, ironic that the politics is still so complicated that they were able to acknowledge that we are economically bound together forever, and yet they can't use the term North America, and each of the countries gives the most important contracted treaty a different name. That tells us that, in fact, how we might think about moving forward in the future. It is not about the politics. It is not when North American leaders have attempted to push the agenda, the trilateral agenda, or even in some cases, the parallel bilateral agenda too fast, there's always been a pushback. Everybody loves, what did your brother say about 10 years ago, Andres? I have a Latin heart, but my wallet is strictly North American. Everybody loves the economic benefits, but nobody wants to adopt the political identity. And that's okay, actually. That's okay, because our people are knitting the societies together, as Tom pointed out in the book. We need to think about building the next phase of North America based on the success that we've had, the success of the shared production platform. As was said a generation ago in the Clinton campaign, it's the economy, stupid. And let's recognize that and actually take all of the steps that we need to take to advance the North American vision, but tie it to people's to their pocketbooks, tie it to their economic interest. And I think we will have a path forward. What does that mean in the current context? It seems to me that three areas that we need, that the book takes up, that we need to focus on to assist the further growth of this shared production platform. By the way, 80%, as Laura Dawson pointed out recently, 80% of the trade among the three countries are inputs, right? They're inputs because we don't so much trade as make things together. This back and forth across the border to build an aircraft or to build an automobile or to build a sophisticated medical device, we make things together rather than trade. So when we see foreign trade, it doesn't involve what Canada, Mexico, and the United States are doing within their shared production platform. That's unique, but what can we do to take the next steps? So the first one is we do need to have more efficient borders. We do need to continue the work that was started over the last 20 years on both the U.S. northern and southern border in terms of pre-clearance of people or pre-clearance of cargo, unified cargo processing, all the ways in which customs and immigration authorities cooperate. All of this needs to be perfected. It needs to be improved. We need to go to the next level in terms of coordinating on bricks and mortar infrastructure. But more importantly, as my friend Edgar Ramirez always says, it's the invisible processes that we need to straighten out. We need to get regulatory harmonization right so that we're not defining specifications for the same product in not only three different languages, but in three different ways. Build more efficient borders to make this 3 trillion and growing trade function in ways that are important. As I've said to my Canadian friends, there is cargo pre-clearance to be accomplished so that matters are cleared at the factory floor and not stopped as they go across the border. We do and have made more progress actually in the context of el comercio entre México y los Estados Unidos than actually with Canada. Pre-clearance of persons. It's overdue between Mexico and the United States. There's always a reason not to do it. But in the same way in which when people said to me, you can never let Mexicans into the global entry program. And I told them, watch. And now we have, I think, more than almost 200,000 Mexicans in the global entry program. Sin un incidente negativo o que ha afectado el programa. We need to do that. So make the borders more efficient. Second, we do need to harmonize our energy policy. That's one of the great continental assets that we have. We have energy sufficiency in sight, self-sufficiency in sight, and we actually need to get there, both in terms of not only making hydrocarbons work during the period that they will continue to dominate the energy scene, but also to prepare for their replacement over time. We cannot do that unilaterally. If we reach a non-hydrocarbon solution over the next century, or at least half century, We need to work together now to be able to do that. And third, and most important in terms of building off of the economic strengths of our society, our societies operating together, we need to actually take advantage of one of the other great assets of North America. We have demographics among the three countries that are extraordinary. The youthful, energetic, intelligent human resource base of Mexico, combined with the professional capacity, investment capacity, and natural resources that are available in Canada and the United States. This is a marriage that was made in heaven, and that's why it's working so well. But we do need to invest in our people. We need to recognize that migration policy and labor market policy are actually two sides of the same coin, and we need to get to the bottom of that. But we also need to do what Sergio Alcocer. Mil gracias a Sergio por dos capítulos. One was the idea of workforce development. We have to invest in the training, professional development, and education of our young people. We need to raise their capacity in Mexico and the United States and in Canada in order to meet the challenges of building out this shared production platform. And then let me take up one other big challenge. We think in this book of North America as not obviously being based at the core of Mexico, the United States, and Canada. These are the core partners. But the vision in the splintering world order, the world order is disappearing. The one that has governed since the end of World War II, it's disappearing. And it's being replaced by blocks and regions. And the North American region, which will compete with the East Asian region and with the European region, needs to recognize that we go from Colombia to the Arctic and from Bermuda to Hawaii. That's what we should think about as the basis of North America. And as we strengthen the North American shared production platform, we actually have to incorporate Central America and then the Caribbean into the economic picture. Here's where governments come in. So the maquila industry, when China took over a lot of the manufacturing, low-cost manufacturing, as we exported electronics over the last 30 years to China, actually it was a good thing. And Mexican business and the Mexican people rose to the challenge of upping their manufacturing scale, where they were in the production platform. We need to do that again. Much of what happens on the U.S.-Mexico border in terms of maquilas needs to be transferred to the south of Mexico, to the borders with the Northern Triangle. We need to move that business to Central America and have Mexico continue to grow in terms of sophistication. Here's where we need governments. We need governments to get out of the way by facilitating policy, and we do need tax benefits. We do need to give business people the tax benefits to actually make these changes, and in some cases, investment subsidies. That's how we will transform this. And it's important that we incorporate Central America. Central America, with 40 million people, is part of North America. We can't be seeing it as a separate group of nations that have no relationship to where we are. And frankly, we need Central America because we cannot solve many of the problems that afflict North America, the transnational problems of transnational organized crime, of weather emergencies, of cyber security. We actually have to look at this as a perimeter continental set of problems. So as we go forward, we need to be bold, as Tom suggests. We need to recognize, as Shauna indicated, that this history, we are at a turning point. We are at a turning point for where North America is. We are at a turning point where the world global geopolitical order is, and we are at a turning point in terms of where international relations and regionalism fit. As A.J.P. Taylor, the British historian, reminded us, when history gets to a turning point, if you don't turn, no es bueno. Gracias.
That's a verbatim quote, right? Okay, so thanks so much, Alan. I think I'm being fed questions through the phone, which is now apparently allowed in analog practice. So for all of us, our friends following online, please, you can use the chat to send questions to the panelists. Should we go straight to Q&A? Do you want to? All right, so we can go straight to Q&A, and the first one, I think it's a good question. So we built things together, and yet there's no identity of it. We're all slipping back into made in the USA or made in Mexico, made in Canada. Can we think of a made in Mexico, made in North America? Is that a thing? Will that ever be a thing?
I think as Tom indicated, these are the things that keep getting in the way. And we can't take it all on at once, but one that we should definitely take on is to point out and get it spread throughout the U.S., the population of the U.S. and Mexico and the United States, that we make these things together. That 40% of everything we import from Mexico contains inputs from U.S. workers. I've never seen the number if you incorporate Canadian input, but it must be another 20% at a minimum. We need to recognize that and then start building up this notion of buy North American. I think that's one of the messaging areas that I would focus on, absolutely. And stop people, have people understand the way this shared production platform works. We can't over message, but that's a key message, and I think the person who raised it is spot on.
Sure. If I could just add, I mean, be the first to that market, right? So be the first company, be the first civil society organization to brand itself as North American. Why not? I mean, maybe not the first, there are a few. And, thanks for this forum. I mean, let's bring more of these forums to North America Space. Alejandra, gracias por poner Alan y Tom en conexión con nosotros. Y ha sido fantástico, and we can do more and more of this. And I think we have a great opportunity looking ahead to the World Cup in 2026 to start talking North America.
I mean, yeah, that's another powerful, it's symbolic, but it's a powerful symbol, I think. So next question that we got, maybe Tom, you'd like to catch this one. I think Alan spoke of the need to take this broader into Central America. You spoke of the need to make more inclusive development. Is there a way to genuinely develop some sort of common understanding on what a development strategy would look like, considering how each country is likely to have its own particularities and its own system and approach? So what do you think? Is that an area where there could be progress?
Yeah, thanks so much for the questions. I think these first two questions actually are linked if we think about how to answer them. The idea that you're building just in one country it's really, it's a false dilemma in a sense, right? If you have different stages of manufacturing happening in different countries with the energy coming from a third country. So in practice, we are building North American, and we're just not talking about it that way. So I certainly agree with Alan and with Shauna. When it comes to sort of a joint development strategy, clearly all three of the North American countries are going to have their own development priorities, their own challenges, right? Those priorities respond to different challenges that each of the three countries faces. I mean, so instead of trying to say we have a shared strategy for development, I think what's important is to try to identify the areas in which the development, the advancement of our partner also ends up actually really serving our own interests in the neighboring country, right? So that is, where can we make strategic investments? Where can we build workforce development in ways where those benefits reciprocate across the region? And I think this is more than anything, rather than a change of strategy, it's a change of optics about how we think about the region. That is, thinking about the benefits as being shared, thinking about the ways that benefits in our neighbor also create benefits at home. And once you start to shift that, the question is less, are we all going to have the same approach? It's what are the ways in which advancing the interest in our neighbor is also good for us, and we're so closely interconnected that there are myriad ways in which I think that's the case.
Let me just add to this, endorsing the idea of recognizing mutual benefits, but a friendly amendment, Tom, on how it's done. Remember where Damián, quoting from the introduction of the book, said the genius of North America, unlike Brussels and the European Union, is that it was built from the bottom up. We in government like to write long development strategies as intellectual exercises. Frankly, the world doesn't operate that way, and we shouldn't be disappointed that so many of our realities don't turn out the way they did when they seem so intellectually make so much sense intellectually. If this idea is right, let the shared production platform be extended by where business wants to go. So right now, with the pivot of China away from the West and vice versa, the war in Ukraine, we're actually going to see a reshoring. But, this notion that we could bring everything back from Asia is foolishness. We can't. The factory floor exists in Asia. We exported it, and we don't have the capacity to replicate that. But we do on semiconductor chips, on a whole series of strategic items. We do need to bring these back. Plus, we need to bring back some low-cost manufacturing that would be suitable for Central America in terms of small electronic parts. What Mexico did in 1998 or 2000. But let the business community tell us where those parts are. Now, one thing that we can do institutionally to develop a strategy is to have a public-private commission that looks at whether it's chips, semiconductor chips, or other things. What strategically, in terms of rare earths, for example, or rare minerals, do we actually have to have a North American presence? That's as far as I think I would go in this idea that we're going to have a strategy. Let the business community tell us what they can take on, but we also do need this institutional public-private institution to say, hey, you really do need silica if you want to have battery-driven cars, and if you want to get away from hydrocarbons. So, wanted to add that.
I agree. Of course, agreeing to let the business sector decide is a policy decision itself, and I'm not sure we're there at the exact same moment. But I see your point. So we have 3 questions in the room. So, Celia Toro, please.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
I mean, we hear you. I don't know if some people can hear you, but we can hear you.
Very nice to see you. And I fully share your views. Tom's about global dynamics shaping the region's trajectory. I couldn't agree more. And this is what we are living now. And this is what we consider the new opportunity now. It changed in the world, if you want to look at that way. And I fully share Alan Bersin's view that border management is crucial for trade and shared production. However, I see a bit more of a complication in terms of domestic politics. As you say, Alan, business will go where it has. They will move the production that they can. They hopefully will find places and people to jump in. But North America, if it is to live and thrive as a vision, as a project, needs to do better for the people. This has not a developmental consequences. It did not have for Mexico. There was no closing of the gap between income in the US or in Mexico as we thought it would. And it won't be until labor can come and go more freely. But public opinion in the three countries, domestic politics, if you want to look at that, to put it that way, are not supportive, are not thrilled about the North American project again. Nobody is against it. There is a very basic agreement with the idea. I mean, nobody says, no, let's get out of it. It's okay, that's fine, that's fine. Doesn't affect my life. So if we don't, and one of the reasons for this, I believe, is the security concerns that we want to solve at the border instead of somewhere else. Because what made, for instance, I remember the studies made, we required mid-sized firms to certify themselves to cross the border quickly. Okay, you can do that by pre-clearance, by pre-checking, by go and see how are you building your stuff. And the mid-sized, most of them Mexicans could not certify themselves. Amazing. Only 30% of them. The other 70% could not keep on, hanging themselves or pushing or jumping into the production line. And that was a security concern that was exaggerated in many ways. We had to check, but it's coming and going 6 times, 7 times as you have calculated. It's very costly for the Mexican firms that may have a more important impact on people's life. So that part, that public opinion maybe standing on the way what the world is pushing for, or is pushing but that's it. The other is, I think the Central America is part of North America. I fully share that, but I think that would be a very difficult thing to do, to bring them in, pull them in. I agree with you, fully agree. They are part in security terms, in trade terms, in demographic terms. They will be moving north sooner or later, north and south. But that's a big issue for the North American project. I don't know how to push it, but I think that we should not repeat the mistakes that we've made with our common border, US-Mexico border, in the Mexico-Guatemala border, because it will only hinder trade and investment, I believe.
So maybe I think it's a more ambitious definition of getting out of the way, perhaps, and specifically on border issues, right? So I don't know if you want to comment. Should we perhaps put a couple of them together and then react? So Ambassador Andrés Rosenthal, please, if you.
Muchas gracias. Y bueno, empiezo por felicitar a Alan y a Tom por este volumen. Qué bueno que finalmente salió. Me parece un esfuerzo muy importante en esta coyuntura justamente de la que hablaban los panelistas, de que es un momento crítico para todo lo que es el concepto de América del Norte. De los comentarios que hicieron los panelistas y algunas de las preguntas, me vinieron a la mente algunos temas que quisiera yo mencionar. En los años 50, 1950 y 60, Japón, que tenía un serio problema en comercializar sus productos en Estados Unidos, sobre todo cuando Sony y otras marcas todavía no eran muy conocidas y se consideraba que la calidad y los precios que eran bajos en ese entonces. Lo que hizo Japón fue una cosa muy inteligente. Y esto del comentario sobre las etiquetas, de dónde se producen los productos. Nombraron a un pueblito, una ciudad pequeña en Japón, USA. Y entonces imprimía de todos los productos made in USA. Y esa era una fórmula que, por cierto, ayudó mucho en su momento para que se considerara que Japón era otro tipo de candidato para hacerle competencia, sobre todo en electrónica y en otros temas. Dos temas que tienen mucho que ver con el momento. Uno es cuando se negoció el Telecán y se puso en vigor, Frank Graves, que dirige una encuestadora canadiense que se llama Ecos, hizo una encuesta que pedimos los tres países para poder identificar si había o no había una identidad norteamericana en los tres países. Y la respuesta fue muy decepcionante. La verdad es que en los tres países no había en ese entonces, hace 30 años, una identidad norteamericana. Graves acaba de hacer una encuesta nueva, ahora, hace poco, con más o menos la misma pregunta. Y curiosamente, la identidad norteamericana ha crecido, sobre todo en Canadá, que es un tema que a mí me llama mucho la atención, porque Canadá en los años 90 más bien se identificaba a todo el mundo ni siquiera como canadienses, sino como quebequenses, ontarienses o picienses o lo que fuera. Y ahora parece que más de la mitad de los encuestados en esta encuesta consideraban que Norteamérica los identificaba. Yo creo que eso ayuda, en cierta forma, a que este momento sea un momento importante para volver a tratar de darle al concepto de América del Norte vida. Hay dos otros temas que quisiera yo mencionar, perdonen. Una es, en el año 2025 y 2026, vamos a tener que ver si el tratado trilateral sigue o no sigue. Lamentablemente, por muchas de las disputas que actualmente están en la agenda de los tres países, Canadá, Estados Unidos, México, se oyen más y más voces, en Washington sobre todo, que dicen que el USMCA, el TEMEC o el CUSMA no funciona. No funciona para Estados Unidos, no funciona para Canadá, porque no resuelve los problemas tradicionales que Canadá ha tenido con Estados Unidos, con el tema de la madera, con el tema de los lácteos, y obviamente la disputa mexicana-estadounidense, más bien Canadá, Estados Unidos hacia México, en el tema energético, tampoco parece ayudar a darle fuerza al nuevo tratado, cuyo principal objetivo fue darle mayor certidumbre al proceso de solución de disputas o de controversias. Entonces, a mí me parece que es menester trabajar, y esto sí es un tema de gobiernos junto con el sector privado, para que en el 25-26, cuando ya no tengamos el mismo gobierno en México y quizás haya un nuevo gobierno en Estados Unidos y quizás haya un nuevo gobierno en Canadá, se trabaje para reforzar el tratado, porque si no va a ser muy fácil para quienes se oponen destruirlo. Y finalmente, hacer mención que no he tenido oportunidad de ver el libro, pero se está tratando de darle una nueva vida al Foro de América del Norte, que copresiden Canadá, Estados Unidos y México. Hubo una reunión en San Diego a finales del año pasado. Ahora toca México ser sede. que va a ser creo que en el mes de octubre o noviembre. Y ahí también es un poco esta esencia de lo que Alan Bersin mencionó, de una comisión o un grupo público-privado que pueda realmente, si se le dota de esa posibilidad, hablar de hacia dónde hay que navegar el concepto de América. Muchas gracias y gracias por la invitación.
¿No? Si les parece la última de las tres que tenemos en la sala, Jorge Armijo.
Thanks so much. Muchas gracias por la invitación, Jorge Armijo, del Senado y asociado a COMEXI. Y un poco siguiendo la línea del planteamiento del embajador Rosenthal en cuanto a la necesidad de reforzar el USMCA. Me parece que un aspecto fundamental lo que mencionaba de la integración de los mercados laborales, justamente para verle futuro a esta plataforma de integración conjunta. Me parece que es fundamental visualizar cómo se está dando esta tendencia de integración de los mercados laborales. Y claramente Estados Unidos es un caso muy interesante. Y hablando del TMEC, pues contamos, por ejemplo, con esta visa TN, Trade NAFTA Visa, que justamente facilita que migrantes, tanto mexicanos como estadounidenses, puedan intercambiar, movilizarse entre los distintos países, justamente para participar en distintos sectores, en distintas tareas. Y desafortunadamente en la negociación de 2018, esta visa y este listado de justamente las profesiones en las que se puede aplicar la visa, pues se quería desintegrar. Afortunadamente México logró que se mantuviera. Y con este comentario quiero decir que y esta es mi pregunta, parte de mi pregunta, si existe realmente esta visión conjunta de avanzar en la integración de estos mercados laborales. Porque en este momento, pues Estados Unidos no quería mantener esta visa. Entonces, afortunadamente México logró mantenerla, y lo cual pues, nos permite, rumbo al 2026, avanzar, digamos, partiendo de ese punto, que sería un poco modernizar esta lista, quizá porque son profesiones que, si se incluyeron durante la negociación del NAFTA, pues claramente ya están, digamos, de alguna manera no actualizadas, pensando en estas nuevas industrias que están surgiendo con el nearshoring, con el proceso de digitalización, etcétera, ¿no? Eso por un lado. Y por el otro lado, es claro que Estados Unidos necesita, pues, de capital humano para muchas industrias, y claramente los migrantes, en particular migrantes mexicanos, aportan en definitiva a esta economía, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cuál es la tendencia que estamos viendo en este sentido? También por el lado de la competitividad, pero sobre todo desde la lógica política, que es complemento de esta lógica económica, que necesitamos reforzarla en definitiva, ¿no? ¿Cuál es su opinión y qué elementos abunda sobre todo este documento, que espero también tener la oportunidad de leerlo próximamente? Gracias.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias.
Tom, do you have we'll take a first crack. I have some definite views on labor markets and H-1B visas.
Well, I'll leave that one to you then, and maybe pick up just a few other points from those interesting comments. There's a lot there, obviously, and one of the things that Celia mentioned, I think, is quite important, which is that when we have policy failures in different themes, they often are felt most at the border, and then there is an attempt to deal with broader policy failures at the border, right, by closing things off, and that creates all sorts of risks for our shared economic platform. You can highlight whether it's fentanyl going north or U.S. arms going south. These are policy failures in broader environments that create all sorts of difficulties at the border. One thing that I wanted to highlight as well, and this is in response to some of the earlier discussion too, about institutionalizing or looking for institutional ways to overcome some of the what we might think of as market failures in what is definitely an economically led, business-led region, is to think again about reinvigorating and expanding the mission of the North American Development Bank, to think about ways in which that can identify some of those market failures, both of inclusiveness and then very specifically questions on the border regarding infrastructure. I think it was Alan mentioned questions of regulatory cooperation as well, and this might connect to the earlier question about a Made in North America label and Andres Rosenthal's example of Japanese products being relabeled Made in USA. But if you could think of a future in which there's regulatory cooperation that would allow a Made in North America stamp on products to signal that it could be sold across the region, I think that's where you start to get past some of this economic nationalism. I'll turn it over to Alan, I think, to pick up on some of the points about visas.
Yeah. So on the labor mobility. Always, with regard to the U.S. position on it, I'm always quote the French philosopher who said that hypocrisy is the homage that vice pays to virtue. Mexican labor and now increasingly Central American labor has built much of the United States in a whole variety of industries, and yet we've never, since the guest worker program that ended in the 1960s, the Bracero program, we've never been able to do it. Although one great success that none of us acknowledge, is that most of the agricultural workers, the Mexican agricultural workers who are picking crops in the United States today, are doing so legally with regard to the H-2A visa. Why that hasn't been able to be extended to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras is another issue to be looked at. But you put your finger on the NAFTA visas, and that's something that has gotten caught up in the entire political polarization in the United States that has blocked any serious discussion of immigration reform. From the time that I've been involved, every 30 years, there was a major immigration reform. I've seen 1.5 of them. We were blocked by that. But those who project, we as human beings, we have a tendency to project into the indefinite future what's going on right now. People say, "Oh, the Americans will never get over this." I'm not that pessimistic. We will get around to reforming the immigration laws. It may take 15 years when it should have happened 10 years ago, but there will be a reform. But in the interim, what you're seeing in the United States now is that the executive power and the judicial power are actually administering the immigration laws. When Congress is unable to actually act, you see the courts step in, not good, but they do, in response to lawsuits. And then you see the executive, whether it was DACA or a whole series of executive orders that have happened, the White House, the executive will step in. I think we could do that on the NAFTA. If there were a negotiated set of changes, we could deal with a major problem, which is what happens at the border when our Canadian colleagues come with an armful of documents to give to a CBP officer who isn't prepared to deal with it. We can fix that. That's something I think that could be remedied. But over the long term, we do have to recognize that migration policy and labor market policy is lo mismo. And the longer that we put that off, the more sloppy it's going to be, the more danger we put to migrants. But look, this is not unique. Europe, during the 2015-2016 crisis in Europe, Angela Merkel recognized the hypocrisy is the homage that vice pays to virtue. He was going to let in many Syrians and Afghans in order to build the labor market, and the Iraqis to build the labor market of Germany. It backfired. It was a reaction, but there were also, I don't know, what is it, 2 million Middle Easterners are now working in the European Union. And then just one last comment. There was a very, and this doesn't help our neighbors or workers in Mexican or Central American labor markets. But watch what the administration is doing now with regard to Afghans, Ukrainians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans and Cubans. But the point I'm making on Venezuelans, Afghans, Ukrainians, there are many skilled people being let into the United States now. And there was a very interesting article in either the Washington Post or New York Times that said there's a community in North Dakota, one of the most Republican red states in the United States. They are actively recruiting Ukrainians to come in to work in the oil fields. And now they're extending it to Venezuelans because of the experience of that country with oil production. So the answers are never neat. But the business community, if left to its own devices, will often screw up. I recognize that. But more often than not, they will actually reach a rational decision. And I think the labor market is going to take 10 or 15 years, at least in the United States, to get the kind of reform that we should have gotten when the Gang of Eight came up with its program in 2014.
Of course, Mexico also needs its skills workers to stay in Mexico to develop and continue to grow. So it's a delicate balance you have to find. So, Shauna.
Yeah, no, just again, responding a little bit to the three perspectives and also what Alan just said about the labor mobility. I think there is a critical moment coming up, of course, in 2025 with the CUSMA TMEC, USMCA, to get all three terms into one sentence. And it is a critical moment. And there's also a very important moment happening as well on the labor mobility and labor markets issue. Of course, in Canada, we have a labor market-driven immigration policy. So we have market analysis, which are, I think we've talked about it a bit, but this union between labor markets and immigration policy, I think, is playing out and has for many years in Canada. And I think there's interest in our partners here in North America as well. I was in Mexico from 2010 to 2014 as well. And I'd say that on the migration issue, we're seeing a different Mexico than existed in that particular moment in terms of Mexico as a destination. Some of our Canadian companies, particularly in the north, are facing labor shortages in Mexico, in an area where many companies established originally to take advantage of the labor opportunities. So there's definitely a dynamic. And I think there is definitely a willingness to engage in sitting on the side of the government. And we recently had the Canada-Mexico high-level dialogue on mobility recently. This afternoon, I'll be going with Ambassador Clark to the Mexican Senate to talk about all the legal pathways. But because our immigration policy has evolved enormously and driven a lot by need, of course, in Canada, but it's not well understood. So people are putting their futures in jeopardy by going illegally for economic reasons to Canada when it's not necessary. We need more labor going through legal pathways, and we need to explain those opportunities better here in Mexico. But at the end of the day, what I've seen in our dialogues and in some of the discussions we've had is this disconnect in our systems and our conversations. So if you look at who's around the table for the mobility dialogue, we have Employment Social Development Canada, with immigration, with the Canadian Border Services Agency, with the employment services in Mexico, with the Foreign Service, GAC, Global Affairs is also there. And I'm just thinking what it would involve to bring the US to that table as well. But we need to find a way for these very different systems to understand. And I think through the dialogues that we've had in place since, I want to say 2016 with Mexico, that understanding has really grown. And we saw a fantastic discussion this past 2 weeks ago. And you will all hopefully be hearing a lot more about the labor mobility opportunities to go to Canada here in Mexico. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. So I think we have time for just one more because we're running out of time. So I'm going to do an effort to consolidate three that I have from the people at Zoom. So you wrote the book as nearshoring was taking off, and you do highlight on the introduction that this is an area of promise and where opportunity lies. Obviously, since publication, even though it's recent, things are moving so quickly that things have developed quickly. So one set of questions that we have is, can you have nearshoring if you don't have green shoring, which means energy policy alignment and that type of thing? I think both you and Tom have already said, not really, but I don't want to put words in your mind. The second set of questions is, can you have nearshoring if you don't have friendshoring? And that means some degree of alignment, at least on how we see the world. Perhaps not voting the same in every single vote or having the exact same position, but at least a feeling that we're pushing in the same direction. So
let me start on the take the second first. You know, if North America, the North American vision is empty if we think that we are not friends and allies. I mean, one of the great assets of North America is that we, unlike our Chinese friends who have customers, we tend to have friendships. Now, that doesn't mean they're in a huge diversity of issues, but to the extent that we can't maintain a consensus on where the three countries stand on Russian aggression in Ukraine, or on the challenge, the strategic competition that China provides, you know, then in fact it's going to be difficult to cooperate. It's never going to be seamless, but in fact I think nearshoring does require friendshoring, and I think we have plenty of friendship to actually make that work. With regard to the first quality on whether you can have nearshoring without energy, of course it would be more efficient if we could draw on the water resources of southern Mexico and the Northern Triangle, or somehow figure out how to get the water resources of Quebec. But for the time being, you know, while as I indicated before, I think we need to emphasize harmonization of energy policy, both with hydrocarbons, the transition away from hydrocarbons, and the substitute energy sources. Again, it's never going to be done by seamless planning. So I think there will be nearshoring that happens. Two questions arise, though, that I'd be interested in Shauna and Tom's view, and yours, Damián, and anyone in the audience. So the two big issues for nearshoring are not whether we can find the energy to do it. It's much of the work that we're seeing done on nearshoring in Chihuahua or Nuevo León is being done by Chinese companies. And that's a question that we should actually have a consensus view on. You know, there'll be some in the United States that say, "Oh, that defeats the purpose." Well, you know, only for those who think that war is inevitable between the United States and China, which I hope is that we can avoid the Thucydides divide or dilemma. But we should be welcoming Chinese companies to come to North America, to Mexico and elsewhere, in order to maintain the links. We're not doing away with globalization. And if Chinese companies, to preserve their markets in North America, want to invest in North America, in my mind, we should be welcoming them. And then the second one is that we do need to decide strategically. We can't welcome everything back, and business can't be subsidized to bring everything back, but we should actually have a pretty good idea, as I indicated, on rare earths or rare minerals and semiconductor chips and certain solar ingredients. We should have an idea of what we really need in North America.
All right. So maybe Tom, your thoughts, and then Shauna, you can close it up.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I think you can have nearshoring without those things, but fortunately, in the case of North America, I don't think you need to have nearshoring without those things. That is, we can have nearshoring with greener energy, and we can have nearshoring among friends. That doesn't mean that the three countries are going to agree on everything all of the time, but that's really not the point. Even more, I think that what that type of relationship can provide is can build on is the sort of the friends that exist, in the sense of the deep social relationships that already knit our three countries together. And using business builds on those sorts of social relationships all the time. And so there are friendships in a real sense that knit our countries together, and those are also important for identifying and taking advantage of new opportunities in business. So, I think this sort of our social connections to one another in North America have a profound importance as well for the way that we think of knitting our economies together, and that we think of our future in the region. We're knit together more than ever by migration and by these sorts of ties, and that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. And I think friends, we should be planning together. We should be planning our future together. And you were talking earlier about mapping of critical minerals, which we can do together. We can also do labor market analysis together. We can talk about, when we have investments coming from other regions, are they generating employment, or are we losing access to some critical minerals? So lots of these questions to look at. And I think, friends, we can sit down at the table and do it together.
So the next two is mobility dialogue and China. That's a very important question.
Sure.
Will the US really look, comfortably to a massive presence of Chinese companies taking advantage of the Mexican? I hope so. That's what Mexico would love to have, but I'm not sure if the US will be happy with that, will they? You think so?
Vamos a ver.
Vamos a ver.
Sounds a very good answer for almost every question. So thanks again, Alan, Tom, for editing this volume. Thanks to all of the authors of the book. It's a very timely and very important work. It's very important to restart this conversation, which, as you said, had been paused for a couple of reasons. No small due to the pandemic. We're all stuck in our pajamas in our house, so it's hard to build North America that way. So it's good that we do it now. Thanks to Shauna, to the Canadian Embassy. It's always a great pleasure for COMEXI to work with you. And thanks to all of you for joining us and all people on Zoom. And that's it. Thank you very much. See you next time.